Thank you, George. Although the many, many, many years, neither one of us are that old. So let's not stretch that out too much.
Okay.
um, Thank you, folks, for having me. I really appreciate it. This is my first time at the Naples Mac user group. It's great to see what you all have done with the group and how it's progressing. George asked me to start out a little bit with my involvement with user groups, so we'll get that out of the way pretty quickly. It'll probably be the most boring part of the discussion. Um, I became a user group member back in the very early 80s with the Hershey Apple Corps in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And I guess it was late 80s, probably late 80s, early 90s. Honestly, I don't remember when one night I got hoodwinked into taking the presidency of the group. They basically, our president was resigning. None of the other officers wanted to do it, and they turned to me and said, well, all you have to do is run the meetings. We'll do everything else. You just show up and run the meetings. And like an idiot, I believed that. But it's been a great ride. I had a great time. I was president from then until we ceased operations about two and a half years ago, about a year before the pandemic, I guess it was. In early 2000, I was approached and took on the role of chairperson of the Apple User Group Advisory Board. And I served there for 4.5 years. And during that time, we obviously advocated for user groups inside Apple and outside. We put on a number of user group universities, and then Macworld stopped happening, and a lot of those opportunities for those large gatherings kind of went away. My first podcast was a user group oriented podcast. It was called the User Group Report. It too started back in the spring of 2000, because what I found was that user groups, for all the great things they were doing in their communities, they were not doing a good job of publicizing themselves much outside their communities. And I felt like there were a lot of great stories to tell. So technically, it was not a podcast at that time. It was just an audio file that you could download from the internet. And then podcasting came along a number of years later, just about the time I was kind of starting to run out of user group stories to tell. I'd already started reaching out into the Mac journalist community and, and associated folks. And the true story is, one morning in the shower, I came up with MacVoices. It seemed to be perfect. And of course, that was the time that the podcast I was doing was all audio. So I transitioned over to MacVoices and really haven't looked back. A few years later, I started experimenting with video. Then I eventually went all video, which is what I'm doing now. That's not to say that I only publish video. I publish audio as well, because we all know audio is a lot easier to consume. You don't have to be sitting down staring at a screen to do so. But I like the idea of doing video, because that way I get to see my guests, they get to see me. The audience gets to see both of us having the discussions. And while the audio version is always going to be more popular, and I understand that, if there's an episode that you really enjoy, I think it's great to go back and watch it on video, because we always have a good time. These meetings are never, the shows are never 100% serious, and that's the way we like it, because you have to have a little fun with this. So that's my background in the user group community. It got me started on what I'm doing now, and I've gotten so much out of it that I look back and I think about everything, all the friends I've made, the people I've met because of that decision one night to take the presidency of a user group. It's not too often you can really identify one point in your life that changed a whole lot of things. That was one of them. But let's get on and talk about the M1 Mac and moving over to it, especially if you're coming from an Intel machine, and then what you're going to see once you get there. And George was kind enough to invite me after he saw a MacVoices briefing I did on this. This is going to be a bit of an expanded version, because there were a number of things I skipped over in that briefing, simply because it gets a little tedious. I will go through a bit into a little more detail here for you, You're probably along the way, you're probably going to say, boy, he is really paranoid. And you are right. I am. I am paranoid about my data. I am paranoid, at least as paranoid about my working environment that I've set up on my Macs. And so I want to preserve both of those at all costs. As far as I'm concerned, the time is well worth it to do that. But as you'll see, I did take a couple shortcuts. So when you start thinking about moving over to the M1 Mac, really, or any Mac, but right now it's a major transition to move over to that M1 chip. There are two choices. You can obviously just start installing clean, what normally we might call a nuke and pave. But since you're buying a brand new Mac and it's going to boot up and ask you what you want to do, well, you can just take it from there, start installing your software, start looking up your serial numbers, start setting all your Wi-Fi networks and network connections and all those things. And that's what I tried to do. For about 2 days, I tried to do this. And I discovered just how much time it took. And I admit I was getting a little impatient. So you'll see why that I felt comfortable doing what I'm about to tell you in a minute. But I wiped the computer clean, the new M1, and started over because I'd only installed maybe a quarter of the things that I needed to install. And I wanted to get to that M1 power. I wanted to have some fun with it, but I also wanted to continue to preserve things. So what I'm going to suggest to you is that this process, okay, and it gets a little involved, and I'm going to be suggesting some products along the way. I'll try to post the URLs into the chat so that you have easy access to them for later. The first step, though, would be to run every update on your machine that you can find. That means the system updates. That means the application updates through the App Store. Anything else that you can find, run those updates to make sure you get it as close to the top end as you possibly can before you make that jump over to the M1. This part's a little bit of a pain in the neck, but take just a few minutes or maybe a few hours to clean out your downloads folder, clean out all those places that you stuff files that, well, I'll get to it later, and you never do. Just having less files to move over, it makes it a faster process, but it also is just plain old good housekeeping. And I think from what George said, you have a meeting coming up on that, and that's a great thing to, call it spring cleaning, call it whatever. But in this case, I would call it a migration cleaning, just because you don't need, all those files. And they're just going to take up space on your new machine, and you'll never get rid of them. The next one is more of a manual process. Check now your applications folder and weed out any applications that you don't need for a couple reasons. First of all, we've all gone through the 32-bit to 64-bit transition. And sometimes there's still applications in there hiding that have that big circle with a cross through it that say it won't run on this machine. So why are you having it hang around? And you're going to have enough issues getting up to speed with the M1 Macs. You don't need any of that really old legacy software. So take a few minutes and go through that. But I don't want you just to delete those applications out of hand, because as I'm sure a lot of you know, when you delete an application out of the applications folder, that's great. The application goes away. All the support files, though, the preference files and any settings files and maybe even some data files, don't go away. They're still hiding somewhere. So there are two applications I like to recommend. The first one is called App Delete, and that, let's see, where is it? And that is from Reggie Ashworth Software. And of course, it's going to ask me to wait a minute. Sorry. There we go. Reggie Ashworth Software, or Clean My Mac from MacPaw. And for those of you who don't know MacPaw, MacPaw is a Ukrainian software company. They're very much under the gun right now. So I'm more than happy to recommend their software simply because it works just as well as you might think. And my best wishes go to them and to everyone, all of our friends, software developers, and the Apple community in the Ukraine. It's kind of hard to believe what's going on right now. Those applications, though, will help you identify apps, but when you decide to delete them, they will then search out all the other support files that are hiding somewhere in your library folder where you shouldn't be poking around, and will take them with them. So you end up getting a much cleaner delete of your applications than you might by just dragging it out of right out of the applications folder and into the trash. The next thing I want to recommend, though, is, and this gets a little weird. There's a program called Mac Updater. And again, I'll throw the link in here for you. Mac Updater is a program, and you can pay for it. I'm sorry. I'm throwing, I just threw that to Joan Newman only. Sorry, Joan.
I was about to ask, where was that going? I didn't see it.
Yeah, sorry about that.
It's all right.
Let's try that again. There, that went out to everyone.
We got it.
Oh, and Peter in the chat says Hazel is great for that as well. You're absolutely right. I'm not a Hazel user, but Hazel has the same functionality. But Mac Updater will scan your Mac, scan all your applications, and tell you what version you have and what the current version is. I can't explain to you why, but sometimes even the apps in the App Store do not show the updates that they have. Mac Updater will show you those updates. It will sometimes allow, the software itself will run the update for you. If not, it has the potential to launch, if there's an application installer necessary to do the upgrade, it'll launch that for you so that you can then manually run it yourself. And then there are other times that it just says, hey, there's a new update. There might even be a whole new version number that it can't handle itself, but it makes you aware of it. And this is really important because, again, I want my software as up to date as I can get it before I might move over. I don't want to be doing any of this after the fact that I don't have to. But there are some applications that you will have to update immediately after you make the move over to the M1, simply because the M1 versions are available. They may not run on your existing Mac, depending on what Mac you have. So but it's a great way to go through and just, once again, get things up to date as much as you possibly can. Let's see. So next, okay, this, I'm not sure whether you all will agree with me or not, but I feel pretty strongly about this. I run virus software on my Mac. I very, 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 very seldom see anything that looks like a virus through any of those scans. But, and frankly, usually it's a Windows virus of some kind that's in an attachment somewhere that really can't hurt my Mac, but theoretically I could pass it on. So I want to be absolutely certain that, again, my machine is as clean and as safe as I can make it. So there are two things, two programs that I want to make sure that I show you. The first one is MacScan from Secure Mac. And there's the link to that. The second one is, yes.
Chuck, when you're not sharing your screen, if you intend to, we're just seeing your face.
No, I could share the websites, but I figure this way I'm sharing the links. You can look them up as you wish.
Yeah, and could you not do that, please? Thank you, David.
Oh.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay.
Chuck.
Yeah. Secure Mac and or MacScan by Secure Mac and MalwareBytes are two. They are not necessarily the cheapest applications out there, but they're both very reputable. I found them to be, very useful. I pay for the MacScan version. I do not pay for. I use the free version of MalwareBytes, which requires you to run a manual scan, and I usually run that about once a week or so because I'm not completely paranoid, but I am just paranoid enough that I want to make sure that I don't have any viruses and I'm not spreading any viruses to anyone else. So we've gone through updates. We've gone through the virus protection. So now it's time to run disk utility. Because again, I want my machine to be as stable and as clean as possible before I make that transfer. I run disk utility. I run it a second time. If I need to run it a third time, I will. I run it at least once beyond when I get a clean report back from it. Because if sometimes, and this goes back to some legacy thinking, I don't know if it still applies, but I figure it doesn't cost anything to run disk utility a couple times. But there was a time that if disk utility found a problem, it would fix it, but maybe there was a problem that was underneath that problem. So you needed to run disk utility several times. I still like to run it several times just to make sure I'm as clean as I can possibly be. So at this point, your old Mac now is updated, you are virus-free, and you've done all the maintenance on it that you can possibly do. And it should feel pretty good to you. This is where we get into a little bit of debate about the best way to approach things. The first thing I want to do though is I want to back up my Mac the way it is right now. Again, I've made it as clean as I possibly can. So, invest in an SSD or 2 or 3 and back your Mac up to that. I usually have at least 3 backups before I'm ready to do a transition like this. And I'm talking about a transition to a new computer, whether it's M1 or not, or to a secondary computer, but I want it as backed up as I can make it. And also, should anything go wrong, I want to be able to return to the state it was in. So I would encourage you, and if you're not using something like Backblaze for online storage, I encourage that. If you are, make sure that your Backblaze online backup is up to date, because it should be, and there's no reason to believe it shouldn't be, but I want to pull the system preferences down and check that. And there are other, online backup services that you could be using that, again, make sure they are up to date, because they're not going to do you any good if they're not. So now I want to duplicate my Mac. And so I like Super Duper or Carbon Copy Cloner. And this seems to be one of those things that everybody gets a little religion about. Somebody is, very much in favor of Carbon Copy Cloner. Somebody is very much in favor of Super Duper. I'm not sure that, either one is necessarily better than the other. Super Duper right now claims to be able to do bootable backups. Carbon Copy Cloner seems to make you jump through a couple hoops to try to do that. And there's a new, just in the last couple of days, there's a new player on this scene, ChronoSync, which has been known as a really super reliable syncing software. Now, it was either, today's what, Wednesday? I think it may have been Monday. They announced that the new version of ChronoSync will do seamless bootable backups. I've tried the demo version. I have had problems with it, not even starting to do that, not even starting to create the backup. I don't know if it's me. I don't know if it's that. So I bring it up only because I'm sure that if you follow the Mac news, you may have seen it. ChronoSync is a phenomenal product. This particular new feature I'm having trouble with. I would tell you definitely to be cautious if you decide you are going to have to depend on it. So you're going to do that local backup. I want you to do at least 1 or 2 others as well, because again, if anything goes wrong, you want to be able to return to where you were. I'm a big believer in not losing that productivity. Next, I want to take one of those backups, and this is where, again, we get into a debate about what's best, what's easiest, what's fastest, what's most reliable. I personally prefer to do a migration from one of those hard SSDs, one of those hard drives, to the new M1 Mac. Now, some people want to connect a cable directly and do it from there. That's fine. Some people want to just do it over their local network. That's fine, although it takes usually a long time. Some people like to do an iCloud backup and restore from iCloud. Again, that's fine. I just personally prefer to be a little more hands-on. I don't want my network going out on me. Right now in my neighborhood, they're doing some construction, and I keep having, those little 2-second power blinks that reset all the clocks in my kitchen and, knock my computers out. And that's the last thing I want to have happen, if I'm doing a network transfer or an iCloud backup or restore. It should pick back up, but why take the chance? So that's why I personally prefer, going from the hard drive. One other advantage to that, though, is that I can keep using my Mac. So I can keep using the existing Mac. I can keep answering emails. I can keep doing things. I need to be very much aware that any work I do or any documents I save on my old Mac will not have migrated over to my new one, but that's usually pretty seamless, especially if I'm just limiting myself. Or if I'm working in something like Gmail, it's all going to the cloud anyway. If I'm working in Apple's Notes application, it's syncing through iCloud and will sync to the new machine. But the fact is that, sometimes depending on what you're transferring and how much you're transferring, it can take a little while. And I don't like to be out of production that long. So at this point, you are migrated over with a little luck. Now, I know some people had some issues with the migration process, and that's okay. I've never had a migration problem, but if you do, once again, you can just wipe that new M1 Mac, which seems like a real waste, but you can wipe that new M1 Mac and start over, because you've got that backup from the hard drive. You've got a couple other hard drives, and you still even have your original Mac if necessary. You probably will have to pay a little bit of attention to some of the online articles, because wiping the new Macs is a whole different animal than what it's been up to this point, before we got to some of the new Mac OSs. But it's not a bad process, it's just different. So I have not had to do that, but I can speak to that experience simply because I did have to do it this time, because I was the one that became impatient and said, okay, I want to start just like it came from the factory, because I didn't want to go through that whole clean install thing. Boot it up and you're ready to go. And I have to tell you the difference between an M1 Mac and my old Intel. I had a top of the line 2019 16-inch MacBook Pro. The difference is staggering. My first M1 Mac was one of the M1 MacBook Airs, and that was amazing. The 16-inch MacBook Pro is absolutely incredible. And for those of you that are going to be getting one of the new Mac Studios, I can't even imagine. I'm jealous, because I'm trying to justify it right now, and we can talk about that later if there's time. So when I bought the 16-inch MacBook Pro is my workhorse. It always has been. I take it to the office. Back when we were going to the office, I didn't have a computer at work. I didn't have a computer at home. I had the MacBook Pro. It went everywhere, along with any of the travels I did as well. So everything was always there. My full production environment was always there, and that's just the way that my lifestyle works. So when I bought the Pro, I bought it with the top of the line 16-inch, 10 cores, 32 core GPU. I upgraded to 64 gigs of memory. I maxed it out, and I punched the storage up to 2 terabytes. I probably should have gone a little bit higher on the storage, but it's not that big a deal to plug in an external Thunderbolt or USB-C hard drive or SSD. The first thing you notice, though, is the battery life. I mean, the battery life on this thing is just insane. Unless you are doing something really super heavy duty that is grinding away at that battery, you can get hours and hours out of useful work with this. The second thing I noticed, and it was a very big thing, is the fan noise. There isn't any. My 2019 Intel MacBook Pro, the fans were on constantly, it seemed, no matter what I was doing, even if I wasn't stressing the machine out. I have yet to do anything, and we'll talk about what I'm doing with this computer in a minute. But I have yet to do anything that turns those fans on. I have no idea why or what they've done to it, but it is truly amazing. There just is no fan noise. Where before, if we were doing this and I was using my MacBook Pro, I might be concerned about, depending on which mic I was using, about you all hearing the constant whir of those fans. Now, I would do it and wouldn't hesitate. And I use it every day for work Zooms and work Teams meetings. And nobody ever says, gee, what's that noise? I do miss the touch bar. That too is kind of controversial. I know a lot of people really hated the touch bar. Some were ambivalent about it. I like the touch bar because I do a fair amount of video editing, and I found it very useful the way Final Cut integrates the touch bar. But, you know, you have to give up something, I guess. There are three Thunderbolt ports here as opposed to 4 on my old Intel Mac. But I would have had to give up one of those ports anyway to charge the computer. Now I've got MagSafe. It works just as it always did. It will prevent you from dragging your computer off the desk if your foot catches in the cable, and it charges just fine. So, you know, I feel like, yes, I lost a port, but I kind of didn't, because I got the MagSafe charging. Having the built-in HDMI port is really, really nice, because I do use that to connect the monitors. In fact, in back of me, you can probably see there are two 27-inch Dell 4K monitors that are blacked out right now for the moment for obvious reasons. The things I've bought with this, I bought just a couple things to go with it. Well, one of them I already had. Because I've tote that MacBook Pro around a lot, I use a hard shell case. And I bought one of the first ones that came out on the market, because it's a hard shell case. You know, it's going to get scuffed up. It's going to get scratched. That's much better than me getting my MacBook scratched as I take it in and out of the backpack or wherever. And every time I go to sell one of my old machines and take the hard shell case off, I'm kind of surprised and a little appalled at just how much it has gotten scratched up. But those scratches, of course, never reach the actual computer. And so I've preserved the resale value, in my mind, at least as much, if not more, than having it scratched up and scuffed up. Nobody wants a machine that looks like that if you're buying it used. The OWC Thunderbolt dock is something I already had. And if you are plugging in a lot of things, you're definitely going to want to get one of these docks. I also, into the second Thunderbolt port, I plugged in an Anker Thunderbolt dock. So I have even more ports. So I can plug pretty much anything in my house into this computer and have it be going through the Thunderbolt ports with the Thunderbolt speed. We were talking pre-show about a problem that Sheeta was having with her camera being connected. And so I don't know, you know, I've had no issues plugging anything into the Thunderbolt ports, including a Shitmodi DAC for audio. I don't have to plug it directly into the computer. I plug it in through the OWC dock or the Anker dock, and they appear and function just fine. So let's talk about the power. I don't know how many folks here watch my show. We do Mac Voices live on Tuesday nights on YouTube. And forgive me here, because for those of you who maybe are not super geeky, just go with me on this. When you record Zoom to their cloud service, you have the option of getting two different files. You can get a 1280 by 720 file that looks a lot like what you're probably seeing on your screen right now with all the people, unless you have it just zoomed in on me. That's the gallery view. and that comes in at 1280 by 720. You can also get a 640 by 360 that is a speaker view file. Now, in a world of HD and better, 1280 by 720 is like table stakes. That's the minimum. 640 by 360 is kind of pathetic. Zoom decided to do that when the pandemic started to cut down on bandwidth usage, and they haven't seen fit to give us back the higher resolution. So what I end up with two files then that I can edit, the 1280 by 720 and the 640 by 360. But the 640 by 360, when you scale it up to HD size, just looks terrible. It really does. So I use some software called Topaz Video AI. Let me throw that in the Video Enhance AI, excuse me. Throw that in the chat for you. Any Babylon 5 fans here? Show of hands. Okay, a couple. I bring up
Yes.
Babylon 5 because this is the software when the upgraded Blu-ray version of Babylon 5 came out. This is the software they used to upscale it. And with that kind of pedigree, it's like, okay, I got to go check this out. So one MacVoices live show generates those two files I talked about, and it's about an hour and 20 to an hour and 40 long. So I've got two files, an hour and 20 to an hour and 40 long, that I want to upscale. On my Intel Mac, this could take a day and a half to 2 days, literally, to upscale those. And during that time, my Intel Mac was pretty much out of production because the user experience was jerky, to say the least, and not reliable and not something you would want to deal with. The M1 MacBook Air, and again, that's with the M1, that took that time period down to about 38 to 40 hours, from several days down to 38 to 40 hours, which is just crazy. You know, it was just not justifiable. With the new M1 MacBook Pro, with the M1 Max chip, I should have said that earlier, I got the Max chip on it. Now it's down to 8 hours. So I went from a couple days down to 8 hours, moving from Intel to the top end of the M1. And I'm anxious to borrow or take those files to somebody's M1 Ultra when the studios come out and see what it can do with that. So what that means, at least for me, from a production standpoint, is that now there was something I wanted to do for the quality of the show, and it was just not realistic as far as publishing deadlines or anything like that. Two, being something that I can end the show, I can download the files, drop them into the Topaz upscaler, and go to bed. By early morning the next day, those files are completely converted and ready to be edited. And the difference is significant. And there's no way for me to really show you here what that is. You can look at the Topaz website, look at some of their examples. Interestingly, I don't feel like they do as good a job as they could of showing you just how good this software is, but it truly does make an amazing difference. I'm telling you that not because you all are really that interested in video production. I'm talking about just the raw power of this machine. Now, do you need that raw power? Do you need the M1 Max or the M1 Ultra? That's up for you to decide. You know, if you're running, if you're a photographer and do a lot of really heavy duty photo editing, it's going to speed your process up. There's no question. Jim Ray from ProView Software is a regular guest on MacVoices Live, and I know it has sped up his development cycle. We've talked about that a couple of times on the show, just the difference it's making for him. So anything you're doing, it's going to do faster. We are finding that we humans are quickly becoming the slowest part of our systems, and so I can tell you now that if you don't need to upgrade to the M1 for the speed, upgrade for the battery life, and upgrade for the, I guess, the future proofing part of it, because this is where we're going now. Nobody would go back and, I mean, we moved from the earlier chips to the Intels, to the Power PC chips, then to the Intels, now we're to Apple Silicon and M1s. And I'm kind of anxious to see what comes of it as we move forward. Let's see what else. I think those are the high points, and I intended to stop somewhere along here, but I kind of got rolling. So let's take any questions here. And what can I tell you about my experience with the M1s that you would like to hear?
All right, well, let's roll that back. And I do have a question about migration. Migrating from an Intel to an M1, I'm always concerned that you're going to have some stuff, some files, some crud coming over that you don't want on that M1. What's your response or comments to that?
Are you talking about applications or files?
Files.
Okay. That would be why I suggest going through your documents folder or desktop folder, wherever you hide files, and don't either delete them or move them off to cold storage or something, if there's something that you don't want moved over.
So I don't have to worry about any errant or incorrect system files moving over to that M1 if I migrate from an Intel to an M1. That's my question.
System files.
Yes.
Okay, system files. I don't believe so. No, that's not true. There's always that concern, and that's why you would do a complete clean install.
Right.
If but again, that is, I don't know about you all, but I mean, my Mac is customized to the hilt. Everything from the taskbar and the sidebar to how many applications I have loading at startup, all those things, and it's a nightmare to try to get all that back. In some ways, I'd almost rather lose data than lose that production environment. Apple's done an amazing job, I think, of making the migration assistant work really well. So I'm not going to tell you that you're never going to move anything. Definitely the safest way, if you have the time and the patience, is to do that clean install of everything and then just move your data files over. But I didn't have that patience.
And I want to say I've done a clean install a couple of times, and yes, it did take a couple of days, and I did make sure that I kept the files on the old computer so that I could read the information or if I needed to, and type it into the new one. But I've done a clean install going from different machines, and I've done a clean install on an existing machine. And I have always found that the clean install made the machine run just so much faster. So that's why I was asking, what's your spin on it? Yeah. Okay. I am looking, and most of the questions that you've had so far, I actually see that they're been answered. Does anyone have a question for Chuck?
See a hand.
Good. You're good, Chuck. I don't see a hand. You're good. You've answered all the questions. Go ahead, Frank.
Chuck, it's not so much a question, but I'm planning on getting the studio, and let me give you some of my excuses for doing it.
I love the way you phrased it. Excuses, good. I can use them, please.
Yes. Yeah. First of all, because you're the professional that you are, that's going to take 27% off your taxes. I mean, you don't have to pay it. Capiche?
Okay.
So you can take the price of that M1 and make that a work thing. And then, from what I understand, if you really want to get going, I mean, dividing that by 24 months, does make it more feasible when you do it through that Apple, what do you call it? Rent, partial paying off without interest. So there's no expense on that. So I went to that, and then I have the iMac Pro, and since I've had it 2017 to now, I've burnt the village a couple, 3 times, and used Time Machine to restore it. And it never really worked, because it worked, but it gave me the same slow responses. So I took my new MacBook Pro 14-inch, and I just did that one at a time. So that was good. But those are some of the, as soon as I sell the MacBook Pro or the iMac Pro and my motorcycle, I'm going to get one.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm right there with you. I tend to just to purchase my Macs outright. I do use the Apple Pay program, or Apple Payment program, excuse me, for my phones, because I'm on the constant upgrade cycle, which is really nice. I keep waiting for them to do something like that with Macs, but they don't, and they probably never will, because there are just so many variables there. With the phones, there are a lot less variables. Your tax point is very, very well taken. There's no question about that. Honestly, my problem though is the studio is not a portable machine right now. So that's one reason I mean, would I love to have it? Absolutely. But that portability is key for me. So it's also one reason it was expensive, no question, but I was happy to spend that money on the top end of the MacBook Pro to give me the most power I could get at that moment and have it be portable.
Well, the MacBook, the Studio is like 2 Mac Minis, which argument can be made for its portability. You just need to bring a screen or put it into a laptop screen or something. So
yeah.
Thank you, Frank.
Okay.
All right. Very interesting. John Buckley has a interesting question. Maybe his question is on everyone's mind. And he's asking, what type of hard drive do you use for your migration? And I don't think that matters, but can you clear that up for him, please?
Sure. First of all, it's an SSD. I'm sorry, I've been around too long, and I refer to it as a hard drive, which implies a spinning drive. I've had great luck with the Western Digital SSDs. I've had great luck with Crucial SSDs in an OWC, a third-party OWC case. The only thing, and boy, let's just talk with what works. I don't want to trash anybody's product, because I've had a couple bad experiences with one particular drive that nobody else seems to have any issues with. In fact, I've asked those friends, did this ever happen to you? And the answer is no, it never happened to me. So I don't think it's really fair for me to slander that particular product. But I would tell you, one of the key things for me with the SSDs, and maybe again, this is because of what I'm doing with it, but it also would apply to a migration, is I want something that is in that external case and that dissipates heat as much as it can, because that's one thing about SSDs is they will get warm. And whether that's caused the failure that I'm talking about with one of the other hard drive manufacturers or not, I don't know. I just know that it happened twice, and that was enough for me, and I won't use that, at least for a migration again. I do have one of those drives, and I use it for let's call it short-term data transfer between devices, and it's fine. It's just that constant grinding that comes when you're rendering something out of Final Cut, when you're upscaling with Topaz, or maybe when you're doing a migration assistant that could maybe give you trouble.
You're going to have to tell us the name of the drive.
No, no, I can't do that.
You
I-
can't.
no.
Okay.
No, it's listen, if I thought it was a real danger, and if a lot of people had reported it, maybe I just, rolled snake eyes and got two bad drives. But, so that's why I don't, the only time I like to bring negative things up is if I'm warning you about something that really could negatively impact you. And here I'm suggesting, maybe it's overkill, but I'm suggesting that you make at least 2 or 3 backups on external drives for that very reason, just to be sure. And of course, you still have your original Mac that you are, while you're doing the migration from those drives, you can be working on. So you still got that set up as well. So effectively, you have somewhere between two to 4 things to go back to if the need happens. And so, and yeah, I'm definitely paranoid.
I have a question, Rashid, I may, because I'm in the process of getting the new product, the Studio, next week. And when I use an SSD, how do I actually migrate from that SSD to that new Mac Studio? You cannot really use the migration assistant because, or can you?
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, as part of this setup, listen, I don't have a new Mac Studio, but I've purchased a lot of Macs.
Yeah.
So when you're running that first time through, it's going to ask you somewhere about the 3rd or 4th, I think, screen it is, if you want to copy data over from an old Mac. And that's where you choose not just an old Mac, but I think it's, what's the phrase? An attached storage or something of that nature. But there's a way for you to select where you want to migrate that data from. And if you've plugged in your SSD, that will appear there as a place to pick it up.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
And if I can, I should make real clear on this. Even if you don't decide to do it right then, I think one of those options is not now. You can go through the entire setup and then run Migration Assistant and plug in your SSD and it'll pick it up and go. There's one little gotcha to some of this that, and I don't think about it because the way I usually do it is I set up a Virgin, I call it Virgin. Every one of my computers has a Virgin account that is there for troubleshooting, that I don't install anything into, that I never open up unless I need to. So I set up each one of my computers as with the Virgin account. Then when I go and use Migration Assistant, it's going to ask you, what do you want in, and including which users do you want. So on my old Mac, I obviously don't import the Virgin account because there's really nothing there. So I will pick up my other user account or accounts and migrate those over. But even after that migration, I end up on the new M1 Mac with the Chuck account. I have an account for my office, and then the Virgin account that I set up as part of the process.
When you say Virgin account, what exactly are you saying?
I'm saying that there's a user and a password on each of my computers that is called Virgin, and that I don't go in and do any customization to. Nothing. It just lays there. That way, if I ever do need to go in, if I'm having trouble with one of my accounts or something in normal daily use, I can log into Virgin and see if the system is having that same problem. It helps me determine whether I have a hardware problem, which would show up across all the accounts if there was a hardware problem, or if there's a software problem. In that case, it would only show up in the account that has the software installed and not in the Virgin account.
All right, great, thank you. John Buckley? Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Okay.
My wife
ahead,
and
John.
my wife and I share the same computer. Okay, so in doing the transition, she has an account, I have an account on the computer. So if I were to do the transfer I would get both of those accounts over, just like you just said.
So let me make sure I understand. So you have an account and your wife has an account.
Right.
And so
And she has a
she
lot of her stuff there. I have my stuff.
okay.
So I do the backup. I do the whole computer, backing it up after I've cleaned it all up. And I'll have to have her clean her side. And then we will go through and copy that over to a hard drive or a SSD, and then go through and it'll move everything over then.
Yeah. Just to be, I'm going to make sure I'm perfectly clear on this. So you have an account, your wife has an account.
Right.
So it's, forgive me, John. Okay. I was going to say you have an account Fred and you have an account Ginger. Okay. But you have an account John and you have an account John's wife. All right. So yeah, you're going to want to go through all the process we talked about, both for the systems and for the application updates and everything. But as you said, you're going to want to go into John's account and John's wife's account, both clean out as much junk as you can. And then when you do the backup, you're not just going to copy your account and your wife's account. You're going to be cloning the entire your entire drive over. So that'll include your system as well. And that means that not only are you going to pick up all the settings during the migration, but you're also going to pick up all the data that is in John and John's wife's account.
Okay, now, how well is this going? We have a very old MacBook Air, like 2014. Is there going to be much of a problem doing that kind of a migration?
I wouldn't think so. Because again, you know, one of the biggest problems is just making sure that your software is as up to date as you can get it. And something that old, I'm not sure what system you're running on that, because I don't know how far.
It's Big Sur.
Oh, it'll go back to Big Sur, really? Oh, okay, good. So then you're not going to have that much of a huge issue.
Okay.
And probably I alluded to this. I don't think I said it out right. So I'll say it out right now. After you do the migration, one of the applications that's going to come over is going to be Mac Updater. And I would tell you to run Mac Updater right then and let it check everything. Because now that you're running on the M1 system, it may recognize that there are updates that before it might not have shown you. Just like the App Store. You know, you're also going to want to look at the App Store, because I honestly think the App Store shows you regardless. And then if you try to install an app in the App Store, let's say a new version of Final Cut, I think what it does is it says, no, we can't install this version on your computer because it doesn't have the right specifications, or something a lot less wordy than what I just said.
Okay,
so
thank you.
Yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Thank you, John. Bob Wood, can you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Bob
Hi,
Wood,
Chuck.
what are you doing there?
They're pretty, you know, we're in the same southern area here.
Oh, okay.
So,
I guess they'll let anybody in, won't they?
Yeah, they'll let anybody in. And happy birthday to you, Chuck.
Thank you, Bob.
I have a question that may be outside of the scope of your presentation.
Sure.
And that is about signing out and or removing applications like SetApp or Adobe Creative Cloud. Do you need to sign out before you do the migration? Do you need to sign out and clean out and then like re-register for Adobe Creative Cloud and or SetApp?
I can't speak to Creative Cloud because I'm not a subscriber. So I know that in my personal experience, getting Creative Cloud off of your computer is kind of takes an act of Congress. it seems to be all but impossible to figure out just everywhere it is. With SetApp, though, I can tell you that I was logged in on my old computer. When I backed it up, I did not log out or anything. And when I logged back in to, or excuse me, when I then started up for the first time in the M1 Mac, yes, SetApp among a whole lot of other applications, this kind of goes without saying in today's world, but there are a whole lot of applications that are going to say, okay, you have to go into system preferences and security settings and give us access to, total disk access or screen recording or whatever. And that includes SetApp. SetApp says, that you need to give it permission and sign into the account. But once I signed into the account, everything just came right down and did its thing just like it always did.
Okay. Thank you,
Okay,
Chuck.
Bob-
And also
Bob,
thank
Bob?
you, Ed Adams, for
Bob, I
saying he
can't,
had no problem with migration.
Bob, can you hear me?
Yes?
Okay, I can answer the Adobe question.
Great.
Oh, good. Sheila.
What you want to do, yes, you do want to first deauthorize your computer. In the Adobe, I believe it's in the help menu, it will ask you to deauthorize the computer. And then you want to sign out of Creative Cloud, because if you do not deauthorize your computer, it's going to still hold on to that information of that old computer. And when you sign back in on your new computer, if by chance you're 3 computers down, it's going to tell you you are authorized on too many computers and you will not be able to use the software. So you
Yeah.
have to deauthorize first, and then you can sign out of Creative Cloud.
Then it would require an act of Congress and the Pope.
Well, actually, it seems pretty good about taking the information off your computer. What you want to do, there are uninstallers in each of the Creative Cloud app folders on your computer.
Mhm.
So, or you can just go to Creative Cloud and uninstall the app from there as well. So you can get that software fully off of the computer so that you can then download it to your new computer.
Okay. Thank you
All
very
right.
much. I appreciate the
you're-
advice.
You're quite welcome. Ed, you have a question?
I don't, but actually, James Cutler put it in there. You can
Okay.
deauthorize it once you get it over to the M1. You don't have to do it prior, and I had 0 problems. And Creative Cloud is the primary hog that I have on any of my computers as a photographer, and I've had no problems with it. And to be honest, they are one of the first people that started making universal applications for Photoshop and Lightroom and things like that that just run incredibly well. So you can authorize before, you can authorize when you get there too.
You don't, it's that deauthorization, that authorization is attached to a specific piece of hardware. So you should deauthorize it off of the computer that you are giving up or removing. Otherwise, it still attaches, it still has that information. So
Okay.
you can't then port it over to the new computer and deauthorize it, because it's going to think that you're talking about the new computer. You have to deauthorize it off of the old one first.
I did not have that problem. I was able
Okay.
to go into my account and deauthorize the old iMac and
Okay.
authorize the new M1 without an issue.
Okay, wonderful. All right, great then. Now we know.
Sheila, thank you for that, because I hadn't even, since I'm not a Creative Cloud user, I hadn't even thought about the need to deauthorize. So
Mhm.
good point. Really good
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, I used to work for Adobe. All right, okay. Some things you
Uh-oh.
remember. Okay. All right. Okay. I guess it's still yours. Go ahead, Chuck.
We're starting to run out of time here. I want to say one thing though to you all. I want to congratulate you on what you're doing with the Naples Mac user group. It's really been interesting to watch what happened with the pandemic, where some groups, put something up that said we're suspending our meetings indefinitely, and those notices are still up, and there's no indication of if they're ever going to come back. And some of the other groups, have done what you did. They banded together. They started Zoom meetings, sometimes with presenters, sometimes just as a social thing. But one way or another, they kept going. And you all have taken it to a whole nother level by trying to create a bit of an overarching organization. And I've been watching, and I think it's really, really interesting and impressive what you're doing. So please keep it up. It's great to see the user group community, continuing to be vibrant, at least in a few places, and to be relevant in a few places.
Thank you, Chuck. We do have a question. Bob Jacobs, unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay. I have in the past, when I've changed computers or upgraded computers and I want to sell the computer, had to deauthorize the computer from Apple. Otherwise, they cannot register it. Am I correct about this?
Yes, from as far as I know, from an iTunes, from an iCloud standpoint, yeah, they require you to sign out of that. I mean, I know every time I go to sell an iPhone, one of the first things that they say is, sign out of iCloud and sign out of iTunes and sign out of everything. So that effectively deauthorizes those services.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Bob. And thank you, everyone, for your comments in the chat and for your information. Do we have any other? Yes,
Yeah,
go ahead.
Sheeta, if I may, I just got a direct message. I want to tell you, Maureen Amera apparently is involved with your group now. Be careful of Maureen. She's nothing but trouble.
Okay.
That's
Okay,
not
Maureen.
funny, Chuck.
Maureen, you've been called out. You've been called out, Maureen.
I've been quiet up to this point.
Oh,
Yeah,
Maureen and
we had a wonderful father for years in the group, and I can't imagine that he would have a daughter that would be a problem.
Thank you, George.
Maureen and I worked together in a distant relationship here when she was living in Pennsylvania. And so I heard from her before this presentation. She said that she was getting involved with the user group. It's like, oh my God, don't do that. You'll end up president like I did. So be careful.
Thanks for the advice.
Now, we did have a brand new member that got in last night. And when we started the meeting, she said she wanted to make sure she joined the group so she could attend your meeting. And she would probably have some questions, but I haven't heard her ask any. Goldman? Are you still out there?
It's Rochelle Goldman.
Yes, I'm here. Hi, Chuck. I remember you from the Macintosh user groups in the local Philadelphia area. I remember meeting you a while back, many years ago, in fact. But I just did the migration from one computer to the other, from my old MacBook Pro to the current 14-inch M1. And I didn't wait for it to charge because they told me I didn't need to do that. And somehow I found that it took forever until they found each other, which I thought was unusual because I have a really strong, connection here. But I was just wondering, how when you have the Apple Watch and they say you shouldn't do anything until it's 50% charged when it updated, has there been anything about that taking place with the M1 that you should have it charged to a certain point? It was right out of the box, and they told me that was okay. I didn't have to charge it first. It sat forever until they found each other. I would say maybe 2 hours, and then they ultimately found each other. And the only thing I could find that was different was perhaps it needed to have that extra charge before the migration was able to happen. Do you know anything about that?
I haven't heard anything about that. I mean, I would say it's kind of obvious that I want to make sure that everything is plugged in to power before I started migration. But what I'm not sure I understand. What do you mean by it took them a couple hours to find each other? Were you doing a wireless network migration?
I was, yes.
Okay. I don't know why it would take that long.
And
as long as
they told me to shut it down, and I went through this whole thing with a senior support system that Apple sent me to after I went through the original person that I spoke to, and we had the good, power. Everything was it was okay, but then it took I would say a good 2 hours. So I was wondering, the only thing that I could assume happened was the computer actually had an increased charge because it came out of the box, and it hadn't had the extra charge ahead of doing this, which I would normally have assumed that one should charge the computer, the new one, before doing the migration. But apparently that's all that happened. I just happened to look over at it. It was about 2 hours later, and they found each other. And I was able to do the migration, but I don't know why that delay was there. I was wondering whether you had any insight into why that delay would have been. It was just an unusual thing to happen. It just took a long time before.
Can we? Do you have an answer?
I don't. I can't think of anything other than just the fact that they told you to sign out or log back in or restart or whatever, that maybe a different, better network connection was made.
Mm-hmm.
But
No,
other than that,
it was after that. We actually did that 3 times. The expert at Apple told me to restart, and I had to put it back to hello and what language and where are you located, and we went all through that, and we couldn't get them to talk to each other, and the wheels were spinning, and it was like we're searching, and then ultimately about 2 hours later, I just left it, and about 2 hours later, I looked over and amazing.
Rochelle, if I may intervene as host, I think we understand your case. I don't think we can resolve it, and we are approaching the end of our presentation. So if you don't mind, but we appreciate your questions and comments, but I would like to make sure that Sheila is our moderator and Chuck is our presenter. They know we just have about 1 more minute for the show before it comes to an end. Thank you.
I see. Yes, thank you. And thank you for your attention to my concern.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rochelle.
Yeah, we're getting the hook, folks. So
absolutely. All right. We just have 1 minute left. So what I would like to do, first of all, is thank you, Chuck, for such a wonderful presentation.